Hi, everyone. I'm here today with Byron Carlock, National Real Estate Practice Leader for PwC, who was instrumental in overseeing the emerging trends in real estate that PwC has done, I guess, in the 43rd year with
Correct, yes.
the Berlin Institute or ULI. So Byron's kind enough to make some time with me today and talk about some of the overarching findings and talk about different asset classes. But I think the first question, Byron, is just give us a quick overview on what PwC and who are your, without naming specific names, who are your general kind of clients that you work with in the real estate space?
Thank you. First of all, Patrick, thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be with you. PwC's real estate practice serves a large swath of the investment community. And so if you think about the growth of money being allocated to real estate investment over the last 20 years, our market share is dominant in those asset managers that are institutional investors in the real estate asset class, both domestic, foreign, high net worth, and other institutions that seek to have a percentage of their portfolio invested in real estate. Okay. And so our lines of service are, of course, tax, assurance, and our trust solutions side of our business, and then consulting mostly for systems and cyber and bookkeeping and asset management tracking systems, as well as ESG assurances and other things that allow the portfolio to be managed appropriately.
Okay. So I spent a weekend going through this whole report and kind of wanted to, I read it every year. I've been reading it for years. So that's why it's such a delight to be able to talk to you this year about it.
Thank you.
I'd like to kind of go maybe through different asset classes and see where the conversation goes. And for this audience, certainly the first one would be the pent-up demand for single family homes, which will continue to be an issue throughout the decade, according to this report, and describes it as the quote, the tail wagging the dog, end quote. So given the rise of these work from home policies, I know you've been doing it at PwC for a while, from what I understand, and single family homes built not just for sale, but also for rent, which is a big asset class. What are the opportunities for builders and developers and investors today for that space?
Well, Patrick, there's a lot going on in housing, and you've just touched on several of the facets, but net, it looks like we're about 7 million units short for existing demand. And that doesn't include the growing demand that comes every year from new household formation. And so we are behind the 8 ball. And there's a new category, as you mentioned, in the build to rent and buy to rent market that's now an institutional asset class in the real estate space. And it all depends on how we respond to changing demands in housing. So if you look at the boomerang from the cities, some are going back and some are staying in suburban and even rural locations where they're now allowed to work remotely. So we see everything from the need for more suburban houses for those that are commuting into a metropolitan area to something that's now being called the rural renewal, small towns in cute and remote locations where there's an infrastructure that's being underutilized and there might be more affordability, but yet the person knows that they may still have to commute into the office when called, but can otherwise work remotely. The story, of course, is the shortage of multifamily housing, both for and for rent, because we are underhoused in this society, and we've seen prices escalate to new records. So the supply and demand was out of balance pre-pandemic, and it's only been exacerbated during the pandemic. So we come out of the pandemic with even greater supply-demand imbalance, and it's further become a problem because of the supply chain being interrupted. Builders can't build fast enough because supply of needs to get a house up and running is short supply in many different categories, as well as several that have experienced big price increases, namely in concrete, steel, and lumber. Really spiked, and now it's beginning to come down a bit. But then there are also shortages of everything from appliances to hardware to certain plumbing supplies. And so we've got some catch up to do, and it's going to be a great time for home builders and for apartment developers.
You know, and to that point, on a couple of another interview I heard, it's going to be expanding to these kind of tertiary cities and secondary cities that we had not really focused on before. It was like the big ones on the coast since the end of World War II. And now with lower taxes and easier way of doing business, these other cities are starting to shine.
Well, Patrick, the 18-hour cities were already on a nice growth trajectory pre-pandemic, and they accelerated. And as though many of the coastal employers have given their employees permission to live where they want to live, and so they've chosen to do so. And in addition to that, the business migration to lower cost states and domiciles with low to no state income tax really accelerated as well. So you've seen big migration to Florida, Tennessee. Texas has been a big winner, Utah, and most recently Scottsdale and Tucson, not Tucson, Scottsdale and Phoenix. And so you realize that with the permission to live and work wherever you want to, folks have taken advantage of more affordable locations. Those were the 18-hour cities that were already growing, cities like Nashville, Raleigh-Durham, Louisville, Salt Lake City, Denver. And now you see another tier below that really growing as these third tier cities are becoming more viable. Some even Boise, Idaho was a big standout as you've seen the exodus from the Bay Area to the high-tech market of Boise, where there's an abundance of tech workers. Same for Salt Lake City. And so you see continued growth in some of those previously, second and third tier cities becoming much more relevant to both workforce, education, and business expansion.
Okay. That kind of leads to my next question about looking at multifamily. So as stated in the report, the goalposts kind of moved, and what was hot before, like high-rise condos with lots of amenities, gave way to lower density housing in the suburbs and smaller towns. And I'm reading about garden apartments making a reappearance. But the history of pandemic shows that cities rebound eventually, like New York's already kind of on that trajectory. So it's interesting. What do you think moving forward? What kind of demand will we see for apartments? What share of that is now shifted for single family homes for rent? And what does that mean for affordable housing? So I have some clients for affordable housing. That's still a big thing. And then what about subsectors for students and things like seniors? I know the report touched a little bit on that as well.
Wow, well, you packed a lot into that question.
I did. So just overarching views on multifamily, I guess.
Let's start with the boomerang. The major coastal cities, known in some circles as the Sexy Six, Miami, DC, Boston, New York, LA, San Francisco, each have begun boomerangs, if you will, of return to population in varying degrees. New York, you mentioned, yes, some rents are at or above pre-pandemic levels. The inventory took a dip. It's rebounded nicely, especially as folks have chosen to return to the office. DC, not so much, but Northern Virginia like crazy. Miami has had a quick rebound. LA is rebounding, not so much for San Francisco and Chicago. Chicago's usually 7th on that list. But you think about, it's really a lifestyle choice. The further out you go, the less expensive the housing is. And if you're willing to trade off a 5-day-a-week commute for a 2-day or a 1-day-a-week commute, going in once a week isn't so bad, and you can live further out as long as you've got transportation that's that allows you to get in and out easily, whether you're driving or taking a train or a bus. So it's becoming about lifestyle choice. You realize, I think probably between 6.5 and 8 million people have left the workforce since July. That's a big number. And about half of those were retirements where people said, I'm close enough to retire, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. And others said, you know what, I want a different type of life and a different type of job. And the labor market's tight, so people are allowing themselves to look elsewhere and choose a life that fits their lifestyle desires. And so I think housing is reflecting that. On the affordable side, you saw people move to places they could afford. We still have an affordable issue in our major cities, but if the lifestyle allows you to have a job and live where you want to live, which we're seeing many more employers allow for that flexibility, then it's a win-win, both and. I think the short answer is it's not either or. It's the shoe that fits you and your lifestyle. and the place that you can afford to get as much for your life as possible. Then the niche markets that you asked about, seniors housing and college, are evolving with the demographic changes. Assisted living had a really hard time during the pandemic because of assisted living lockdowns. Many refused admission of new residents. That is beginning to rebound and rebound nicely, but very little new stuff was built. The age for entry has expanded, I think now to 83, a little over 83 years old. So you're seeing the seniors market really evolve to a spectrum of alternatives from independent living all the way through skilled nursing care on that continuum of care. Rates are going up again, occupancy is going up again, and the lockdowns have eased in most all states now. The good news there is the primary obstacle to entry into assisted living is mother or grandmother being able to sell her house. With housing prices where they are, it's financially attractive for that exit and gives the affordability and the options for those choices to be made wherever mom or grandmom or grandfather sits on that spectrum from independent to nursing care. In college housing, that market continues to evolve by strength of the college and strength of the market. So there is still need for updating, renovating, and making better college housing choices available to the student population. But the pandemic also accelerated remote learning. And so the need for the on-campus living experience is in question right now. It's improving on some campuses and not on others. You read a lot during the pandemic about some colleges won't make it. So many colleges and universities are trying to seek their points of relevance for who they're going to be in a post-pandemic world, mixing the on-campus experience with a remote experience and allowing some students to consider remote semesters in exchange for 2 on-campus or vice versa. And so you see this, once again, the word flexibility. What fits your lifestyle and your pocketbook for your college experience and your college living experience? The old style, 4 people to a suite in a dormitory that was built in the 19th century is no longer relevant to the housing situation. And that market has been introduced to much more societally relevant pod housing, ventures with college housing companies and college housing REITs. And the product, I don't know if you've been in some of the newer college housing suites of late, but they are really pretty cool.
Okay.
And
yeah,
so,
I did one my freshman year of college. Actually,
yeah,
first 2 years of college.
yeah.
So.
I think my freshman year, I was in a shoebox with 3 other people, and the opportunity to expand that lifestyle is much grander now. But that's a niche product. And other niches that have found relevance post-pandemic are the growth of data centers and the growth of life science real estate. And so we are really ushering into a new cycle of development for appropriate needs and redevelopment and repurposing space that has lost its relevance.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to my third question, are moving to the non-residential markets, and one that could be repurposed and it's going to have some winners and losers is the office space, which kind of is still a question mark. Some are even calling it the new retail because of the specific and winners and losers, depending on location, amenities. And I know you've talked about this a little bit before, and it's in the report. Where does this space going? How are these winners and losers gonna bear out? And could these be repurposed to other uses or demolished and rebuilt? And highest and best use, and I know it's a big buzzword right now.
So I think the word is relevance. What office space is relevant to new needs and what is not relevant anymore that needs to be considered for repurposing or demolition? The points of relevance coming out of the pandemic relate to sanitation and safety and air quality, as well as certain amenities around other environmentally sensitive issues, such as the building's footprint from a carbon perspective, the opportunity to employ alternative energy solutions, the reliability during a shutdown with resilience in the event of a natural disaster or casualty. And so 80% of our office stock was built in the 1980s or before. And some of those older buildings will likely need to find new uses as residential or completely restored office. And now you hear this rush to the flight to quality and the rush to more relevant uses for buildings with the floor plates and the amenities and the systems that accommodate new user preferences. So I'm hearing from more and more users that a LEED certification is table stakes for occupancy. And if a building does not have a LEED certification, which is an attestation to its environmental quality, its air quality, its safety, its building materials, its lighting, its low VOC carpet and paint, those issues have become more and more important to users and investors. And buildings that don't reach those certifications either have to renovate to get to those standards or consider an alternative use. The good news is some of them are architecturally attractive and make very fine apartment conversions. Some won't and may have to be demolished or redeveloped. And that's another, it's really the life cycle of real estate, is it not? The highest and best use of a parcel of land seems to find its way somehow in urban planning. And that's where we are. Some buildings will lose their relevance and have to be reused, much like we're seeing in the retail transformation. The retail transformation is probably the best example of very well located real estate where the uses have lost some of their relevance. And so you're seeing developers take those big parcels and remember the parking lots required 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of retail. That's a big footprint. Those are being turned into lifestyle centers, lopping off a department store box and building a mid-rise apartment or a hotel, or in some cases, I've even seen assisted living, taking the parking lots and creating out parcels and turning them into vibrant little mini communities. And that's happening in many cities around the country because they are generally well-located pieces of property, all the way to some of them being turned into last mile delivery for e-commerce. And some office properties can be converted to last mile delivery for e-commerce. But there's a use for most space. I had a demographer tell me recently that this is an era where we are going to rethink how we use space. Every space typically has, walls and a foundation and a roof. The space is becoming more fungible for whatever use meets the relevant needs of the market that's demanding the space. And that's what we're seeing happen.
Okay. I know there is some statistics I thought on how over retailed we are compared to Germany and some other places by
I think it was 2 years ago, we actually calculated retail per square foot, and it was, I want to say 24 or 26 square feet per person in the US. And the next closest was Canada at 16 square feet per person. So as Sam Zell has been often quoted, retail is not overbuilt, it's under demolished.
right.
I heard him in a speech one time say, my goodness, there are not enough churches and antique malls to take all the empty retail space. And so I think we're seeing retail find its relevant tipping point as well for space that really meets the needs of the demographics it's serving. And then you're seeing other retail that's lost that relevance be repurposed or demolished.
Right. It seems like those who kind of get it, it's almost like the office employers, those who kind of get it are the ones who are getting the more employees, and doing better than the ones that are trying to stick to the way things were before the pandemic.
Very well said. That's actually, I think said differently, the workforce environment requires the triangle of technology, people strategy, and real estate strategy coming together inside an operating strategy that makes it all work. And so it's gone are the days where you can create a call center in an empty grocery store and expect the workers to enjoy that warehouse-like environment with the ambient noise of phone banks all around them. The workforce environment is a tool for enhancing business operations through people, because the workforce environment is a reflection, it's a branding statement on the company, the way it employs and houses, trains, recruits people. So workforce recruitment and retainage is very important, and real estate's got a big piece of that.
Okay. Yeah, I know, because you call it's the Great Resignation, but for every one job that someone has to fill, they have to retain some other percentage of that. That's like pretty high, almost another position if you look at the ratios, because
That's
of the
right.
fixed rate.
The office, you heard it here, the office is not dead, but the landlords and the employers are having to adapt to this new environment of changed use of the space. Many people over densified during the last cycle, and they're spreading people out again. They're changing the way office visitation is appreciated in the eyes of the associates. When you go to the office, it's becoming a more special event. It may be for a brainstorming session or a whiteboarding session or a social occasion or a mentoring session or a training session or a team meeting. It might be for the opportunity to see a new product demonstration or hear about something new that's strategically happening in the company so that you're up to speed on it. But when it comes down to heads down work, you're no longer in many companies required to go punch the clock for an 8:30 to 5:30 day in the office. Visitation to the office is a privilege and hopefully a good experience, and your heads down work can be done on your time at home. And what we're seeing in many companies is productivity goes up because there's an appreciation for that flexibility.
Yeah, I've been remote first for 20 years, so a little ahead of the curve. And, it's nice to go back into an office and meet with other
Sure.
people. So that drive till you qualify of whether it's for buying a house or renting a house, we may see, to your point, that being further if I only have to come in once a week to the office.
Bingo.
And maybe I
Bingo.
get a room for the night and just
Right.
sort of do it that way.
And some of the great resignation, Patrick, is because some people said, you know what, it's just not me anymore.
Right.
I've loved working in my home in my sweatpants and I don't mind going to the office, but I just don't want to go 5 days a week anymore. If I can work remotely, I'm happy to stay with my company. If that's not possible, I'm happy to look for something else. And the reasonings range from commute time to time lost in the commute to folks that say, my goodness, I've gained 20 pounds. I don't have any clothes I can wear to the office, to I just like the flexibility of being able to take my kids to school and go see them during the day if I need to, or care for an aging parent, or work, part of my time during the traditional work day and then part of my time at night or early morning. And that flexibility has become a new governing principle for employee happiness.
Yeah, because you might be at your most productive at different times of the day that don't fit
Bingo.
in that period of time. So one area that we can't miss that's done really well is industrial, specifically warehouse. And I recently wrote an article for the Million Acre site on top emerging markets, and 75% of the space is for logistics and warehouse. And at the same time, though, we want to hopefully rehome some manufacturing here. So where do you see that going? Because I read something like there's a need for something like 300 million square feet of new space to meet demand nationally. And I see, a lot of these emerging markets have a lot of space, but it's just a dent in that demand.
Absolutely. And you have to think about where it's needed. I mean, right now with the logistics and supply chain issues, we're caught in a crunch where space is short, rates are rising, and it's hard to find land in the locations where the logistics companies want to have their goods distributed. So there's a race to the sites. There is a need. Your numbers are the same ones I'm seeing. It's a huge demand for what is continually limited supply. And the warehouse has become a very important venue for a lot of things going on, from warehousing, distribution, office space, training, and then you have to also match that remote large warehouse need with something closer in for last mile fulfillment. And I'm told that our ports continue to be backed up despite the administration's efforts to see that change. You've still got ships waiting in the sea to come into port to unload. We are very short on many. Whoops, something just happened to my screen. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you.
Oh, good. Okay. With many folks that have goods coming in that don't have a place to put them, and it's exacerbated further by manufacturers that found certain subcomponent parts and component parts for their processes being in short supply during the pandemic. So they've decided to onshore and increase their storage. We used to say just-in-time production was the wave of the future. Right now, it's just in case. I want to make sure I've got enough of these units to keep my production lines going. So you have the e-commerce growth and you have the industrial growth fueling industrial demand.
Yeah, I had yeah, definitely that shipping is a big issue. And I'd read that there are retailers hiring their own ships,
I think
commandeering their own ships, even though it's more expensive to be able to have something for the holidays.
Indeed, I was visiting one of the large wholesale trade marts on Thursday and Friday and was hearing that from the merchants as well as the wholesalers, that this season will be one in which they encourage people to buy early because there may not be things available for that Christmas Eve last minute purchase when you're leaving the office and realize you forgot to buy Aunt Gladys a pair of house shoes. And so I think the needs are going to be great this year. It's going to take a while to smooth out the supply chain. And in your example, where someone's trying to take greater control of their entire supply chain, it doesn't surprise me that someone would try to do that.
Yeah, kind of. It's going to take a while to work itself out. I've been reading till the middle of next summer, and maybe it will be a little past then. And I know you've talked about sort of the transitory effects of inflation, and we don't know yet. We're going to have to see all this plays out, but it looks like we're trying to do everything we can. So much of our shipping goes on trucks.
Well, we do know some things. I mean, there's a chip shortage that's affecting all of the automobile supply. There has been a huge foam shortage for the furniture industry. I don't know if you've tried to order a piece of furniture lately, but it's, what used to be, 4-day free shipping is now 10 to 12 week lead time for certain items. Same for some appliances. And I hear from the home builders that there are obscure hardware and plumbing supplies that they can't get to finish a house and get their certificates of occupancy. So you have some unfinished inventory that's waiting for certain things before they can finish. If you've done a home renovation or know someone that's building a home, that seems to be a constant point of discussion, that until we see the supply chain rationalize, we can't fulfill some of this demand that's out in the marketplace.
Yeah, I had a refrigerator part fail and I thought, oh, please let it be something minor. And it was, because I looked at, maybe just replace it. And the lead times were weeks for all the major retailers. So for now, that's been kicked down the road. And then a final land use is lodging, because that is something that can be repurposed into housing or demolished. And that's kind of bifurcated a little bit. Where do you see the lodging business being?
Well, I think it has to bifurcated or actually segmented is probably the better word. I think certain categories of lodging have really rebounded terrifically in the last 120 days, especially. We began seeing it last spring in the coastal resort markets, where people could go and take their masks off on a beach and it was safer, or they felt safer. Select Serve did pretty well, especially for transitory housing and salesmen getting back out on the road. Some economy and Select Serve was repurposed into temporary housing and extended stay, hospital uses, COVID overflow recovery centers, homeless shelters. So to your point, the lodging industry has very fungible boxes that can be used for many different things, all the way up to housing and full-time living. But the industry is still in a whole really struggling in some segments. If you think about conference and convention travel, it's just now beginning to show some signs of life as people begin, because those conferences, especially the large ones, take over a year to plan. The real estate industry has begun having some live conferences. The ULI conference this year, where we debuted this magazine, was live, and it was about 2/3 in person and 1/3 remote, after people thinking to be about 50-50. But I think we saw the industry eager to reconvene and eager to get back out. And I think Chicago was happy to have a large delegation of visitors in their McCormick Center. And so I think those desires to get out are certainly in our psyche, and our desire for travel and leisure has returned. The planning and logistics associated with large scale convention and business meetings is being planned for somewhere out into 2022 and 2023. But I think it will take until 2023 to feel the impact of a full rebound in the lodging sector. And for hotel developers, it's still very hard to get financing for new supply. So you'll probably see some prices go up because the supply demand continuum will be tighter and tighter as we get to that restoration of activity by 2022, 2023.
All right. I'm also noticed more dynamic pricing with hotels, like they're kind of copying the airlines to goose those profits, special events,
Sure.
and things like that.
Well, and that's our data digital world. You know, that can be measured in a moment. It's dynamic pricing is also introduced in the multifamily industry, hospitality, of course, and in the airline industry. You know, that the analogy is every seat is like ice. It either gets sold or melt, or it's you know, you one or the other. It's so the pricing activity is best managed through very high-tech data automation, and we're seeing that at PwC as we help people think through their use of data and digital technology. Excuse me.
Right. To your point about the ULI meeting, I've been to a few of those, and I could see people wanting to go to those in person because the quality of the network is so good and hard to replicate in other areas.
Well, as you know, I think it's the largest think tank in the real estate industry. It's the largest gathering place for everyone from architects and engineers to developers and investors to come together and talk about the future of land use, the future of our cities. And in the middle of this infrastructure bill that's being discussed on the Hill, largest public expenditure we've seen really since the New Deal and the highway bills of the Eisenhower era. The opportunity for us to reimagine our cities is probably as great now as we've seen in many decades. And so the relevance of gatherings like ULI are very important to the industry and the folks affiliated with the industry. Meanwhile, the contractors and architects, as well as the steel industry and the concrete industry, are anticipating a field day of need because there's going to be a lot going on as these monies get expended.
Okay. To wrap up, any major trends we didn't touch on you'd like to cover?
Well, we've not talked about any of the downside, and I think some of the downside is, you know, fear of inflation, cost drivers, especially with concrete and steel. But this is really an industry nirvana right now, as you think about abundant equity for investment as people increase their allocations to the real estate sector. Inexpensive debt compared to historical standards, still very inexpensive debt, and very high demand across many of the categories we've discussed today. So when you think about high demand, cheap debt, abundant equity, it's a developer's dream to be able to think about reimagining a piece of property or redeveloping or building something new. So I reflect the optimism of the report for 2022. I think it's going to be a good year for the industry, and hopefully there won't be any black swans that surprise us, or a pandemic 3.0 that hits us. But I think the fundamentals are in place for a very good 2022.
Yeah, in early, I think in January of 2020, I wrote an article about black swans and that we were overdue for one. We didn't know it would be, and then 2 months later, there it was. So
that's right.
Always good to be prepared. All right, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure this will be a great and interesting accompaniment for the readers of Builder Developer and others.
Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you again. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks,
Take care.
Byron.